Hello there, listener. You have tuned into what is perhaps the very first episode of Between the Lines, a podcast series where I intend to pick up books that left an impact on me and discuss it with fellow readers for whom the feeling was mutual or maybe not. To give you a background about myself, I am Sneha Gaggar, and so my journey with reading and with novels or storybooks started from my early childhood. So my sister would get me books uh, mainly to keep me engaged and perhaps also to improve my vocabulary enough so that I could score decently in English exams at school. But yes, over the past few years, especially during my graduation and post graduation, I would say I grew a bit distant from books until January 2025, when a platform called Read, Reflect, Relay, which is also the name of this channel, came into existence. You can call it my New Year resolution, perhaps, to read more books. That Read, Reflect, Relay came into being. But yes, through that platform, which was earlier on Medium, I've tried to share book reviews. And now that I've become a bit comfortable with writing reviews, I've tried to venture into podcasts. Now, in this podcast, I have with me Arvind Shankar, someone who describes himself as a simple reader who likes to read, breathe, and absorb, provided that the exercise is enjoyable for him. Else, when the text is not so fascinating, he tries to rush to the next part that engages him. And I feel that it is quite fitting that he is here for the very first episode because he was perhaps one of the few people who bore with me while I was ideating about Read, Reflect, Relay. In this episode, we have picked up the book The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, and we try to discuss or talk about the various characters, the motives that they had, and what we agree or we disagree about the intentions or the learnings or the philosophy given in the book. Hope you enjoy listening in to the podcast. Without any further ado, let's dive straight in. Okay, hello. So, first up, why exactly did you pick up Fountainhead?
Uh, Thank you for inviting me on this podcast, Neha. Uh, I did not really pick up Fountainhead so much as the first time I was around 16 years old, and my sister had a collection of books, and this book was available. My access to the book was easy. I picked it up, I started reading it, and my sister told me that this is too difficult for a young person to understand. And as any young sibling, I was trying to prove her wrong. I read it for the first time. I absolutely loved it. I felt like this is the way life should be led, and this is the ideal version of a man. And then later on, with passage of time, I realized that this book deserves a second look in terms of me having to revisit it 3 or 4 times. And with every subsequent reading, there were small little nuggets that I came across that I found very interesting. And there were also portions that I found myself disagreeing with more. Previously, I was of the opinion that everything written in the book is gospel. If it's written here, this is correct. But then I could start seeing more real world application challenges with some of the ideas mentioned in the book. And therefore, the purpose of reading The Fountainhead was very accidental. I came across the book. I was told I couldn't do it, so I went ahead and read it. But then it developed into a genuine appreciation for the work, and it took on from there.
Okay, so have you been motivated enough or inspired enough by the book to actually implement any of its philosophy in your own life?
Uh, Without going into too much details, yes. There have been instances where I felt like if I am entirely sure that this is the right course of action, even if the people around me don't believe it to be a commercially viable idea, I've gone ahead and done that, much to my detriment in certain instances. So a little bit of background, I'm involved with an educational setup wherein the way I feel that students should be taught versus the way the rest of the industry works is not really aligned. There is far more emphasis on the service aspect rather than making sure that the student improves as a candidate in the way the coaching industry works. And I feel that it is wrong. While we are a service industry, we are not entirely identical to, let's say, a restaurant or a barber shop. Because there, the objective is you walk away with happiness, you walk away with satisfaction. Here, the objective is regardless of whether you walk away with satisfaction or not, you should walk away better than what you had walked in as. And sometimes that may be an attritional path. The fact that the coaching industry in general is shying away from that path is something I take exception to. And this is specifically the example in which I feel I have to implement it. Otherwise, the work that I do, I will not find it worthwhile.
Okay, so in one of the portions of the book, it was mentioned that how while the protagonist, that is Howard Roark, he found the structures to be pretty simple, but this simplicity was because of the amount of work that had gone behind those structures. That is, the amount of complexity that had gone behind building those structures, which made it look so simple on the outside. What are your views about that?
That is one of the most wonderful ideas. People think simple is easy, which is not accurate. Something that has been simplified, something that has been made accessible to the masses, will require a lot of thought. For instance, let's say a few years ago, sending a text, sending a text was something that was not accessible to a lot of people, or watching even social media videos was not accessible to a lot of people. But then, in order to provide that access to millions upon millions of people in India, there needed to be an infrastructure built. There needed to be a entire bandwidth and 4G and 5G and all sorts of structures had to be erected for this simple act of sharing means to take place even in the first place. So simple does not mean easy. In fact, more often than not, simple would mean far more complicated and a behemoth of a task compared to something that is very, very niche. Niche is easier to execute because the range of influence is smaller. But if it is simple and if it is widespread, there is a lot of thought and ideas that have gone into it to ensure that it is robust in most of the situations.
Okay, so I mean, about Roark again, I've noticed in the book, like every time that he was in a situation where I would say a general individual would end up showing some sort of emotion or some sort of a shock, even, he was a very impassive person in those ways, I would say. I mean, he did not show any the expected reaction that people would show in such a particular in such a situation. Why do you think that happened?
I felt that Roark was a heavily emotional person. My understanding of Roark is he's a heavily emotional person. It is just that he picked and chose where he wanted to display that emotion. So, for instance, when he was interacting with Mallory, Stephen Mallory, there, his emotion of taking care of somebody younger than him who was on the right path, but was getting a little distracted because of the negative reception that he was getting for his work. Or let's say for Cameron, Cameron was embittered. He had faced rejection all his life. And then Cameron was not willing to accept new people into his field. But when Roark entered and he saw that Cameron was willing to mentor him and take him along for the ride, in the last days, Roark cared for him. On the deathbed of Cameron, Roark cared for him. For somebody that he felt was genuinely appreciative of Roark as an individual and did not have an agenda themselves. Roark was very, very emotional. He was available. He was present. He did everything in his power to super serve them. But when it came to, let's say, an Ellsworth and Toohey or a Peter Keating, the people who associated with Roark for the sole purpose of benefiting out of that relationship, for them, he said, okay, I am going to be there. I'm going to be there. I'm going to do whatever you ask me to do, as long as it does not interfere with the core things that I believe are important. So let's say a court case is happening. He was not seeking approval externally. There are two kinds of people: people who seek people who have an internal locus of control and people who have an external locus of control. Roark was the extreme version of internal locus of control, where he was not seeking external validation at all. What he felt, because he is a human being, he is a creative person himself, his creativity was not subjected to seeking approval from entities on the outside. All he wanted to do was, if I do my best and I believe this is the best, nobody has a right to comment on it, because this is my work. This is the version that I feel is the best. If you don't like my version, you can choose to disagree with me. But then your disagreement is not going to cause me happiness or pain. A skill that he had mastered over the years when he was growing up in the household with Keating and the mom.
Okay, I guess that there was a point when he was, I guess, helping Peter, and Peter was not in a very, I would say, not in the peak of his career. And seeing Peter's situation, or how he was behaving, it was more like he felt pity for him. And that is when he mentioned that if pity is called a virtue, then it is not a very good virtue. It was not a very good virtue in his regard or in his consideration. Moving on, uh, there was again this or the point where he was sort of expelled from his college, where the dean explained to him that when you're working, it should be as like in par with what has already happened before, or I mean, take inspiration from that, learn to do what has been done, because that has been approved, so maybe that is correct. And that is when Roark mentioned that why exactly, or he questioned why exactly his work should depend or should be influenced by what has already been done, and how should that influence him into making or building what he should, I mean, what how should that decide that what is the correct building to be erected. What would you say about that?
See, this is one of the generalizations of generations upon generations. It's like when the baby boomers were working. Uh, I will give you a real life example. When baby boomers were getting education, higher education, at that time it was very cheap. And then, let's say at the age of 30, if you decide, okay, I'm going to be serious about my life, you had the opportunity to then be serious, go to a factory, do a blue collar job, earn enough that you can take care of a family. The next generation, the age limit by which you had to become serious has gone drastically down. And by now, if you're not serious about the career and the path that you want to take, by the time you're done with 10, it seems a little, let's say, anxiety inducing and striking fear into minds of people. That is because every successive generation has faced a different set of conditions. Now, no generation, or at least most people in every generation, believe that they are the best generation thus far, and what they have to offer is the best version of everything, which is what is also getting represented in the book. These architects of the yore, who had built with wood, who had built with materials that were previously acceptable, with passage of time, new materials had come into play. In fact, this was one of the last things that Cameron told Roark on his deathbed. Look out for the new materials, the concretes and the plastics, and what all can you, how you can use them to build new stuff. What This is a grander idea about conformism. We, as a society, are okay with people doing stuff that we expect of them. But if somebody is taking a, let's say, drastically different route, that is when everyone is up in arms. No, this is not how it should be. This is not how this is supposed to go. Which is what Roark faced in college, where the professors were not happy with his designs and his assignments because they felt that he's not going by the prescribed literature, the prescribed materials that should have been used, or the designs that should have been used. Roark was simply of the opinion you were drawing results and conclusions basis the available data at that point of time. Now that the available data has expanded, your results cannot be identical. They should be more nuanced. Or let's say, if I could draw a parallel with the real world, 15 years ago, if a teacher gave you a 1,000 word assignment, you had to do that 1,000 word assignment by going to the library. At best, if you were rich, you had access to the internet, you could scour the internet and find out stuff. Now, all that it takes is going to Chat GPT and typing in, give me a 1,500 word essay on something. So, let's say if I was a teacher in this era, my task would turn into, I would say, use the Chat GPT as much as you want. But then, what I want you to do is contest contest the claims made by ChatGPT in class in person. Because then what the child would have to do is they'll have an essay prepared from ChatGPT. They would also need to do self-reading. And then the purpose of them getting interested in the text would be via the ChatGPT essay. But then my grander idea is that processes have to evolve. You cannot stay in the same place and expect outcomes to be different or progress to be made when you don't want to update the way progress was made in the first place. Let's say we continue to make railway tracks the way they used to be made 100 years back. We wouldn't have faster trains today. We would have the same slow trains that we had earlier. Now, those trains at that time were fast, but now they would be considered slow. So, with passage of time, that has to be updated. This is something Roark believed in, or at least I feel that he believed in. With the availability of additional data, your ways of processing information, your ways of coming up with solutions should also get updated, which was not what the university wanted to do at that time. And in a very sad way, that is also true for the current universities. We are very, very bound by the strict syllabus that is set, but that's the way life goes.
So this was also, I think, something he encountered when he was actually building. I mean, he was a full-blown architect and he was constructing buildings or whatever projects he had. That whatever he made, they tended to be something very different from what was seen by people, from what was expected, and this was again, this was what put him. I mean, one against many, right? I mean, they were I guess they were a bit fearful also of what he was trying to do. So basically, the main idea that individualism versus collectivism, they saw him as a threat to, I mean, coming up with newer designs or coming or having the courage to actually build something of his own without fearing the consequences or the fact that it may not be liked by the masses. That could also be one. I mean, that is what I observed in the later part of the book.
So I think on this front, what is happening is there is a directed effort towards promoting conformism for most people. As in, you go to the schools, you go through the same syllabus, you're told this is the right answer, this is not the right answer. You go to colleges, you get the same sort of education, and then you're told this is what should happen, this is what should not happen. So when people are growing up in such a system, wherein standing out, taking a different stand is continually punished. What happened with Roark? For his unique designs, he was expelled from the college. But because a system rewards conformism, that is what most people have grown up with. At a later point in their life, as let's say, when they're doing something for themselves, they might choose to stray away from the beaten path. But when it comes to something that is public, let's say in India, in the Indian context, marriages has to be a social event, has to be a huge event where you invite so many people so that they know that everyone knows that you had a sumptuous meal and all sorts of fancy people were invited and it was a huge event. Honestly, in the modern day and age, let's say in the last 10, 15 years, those ideas are being challenged more robustly, not because people have become more accepting of novel ideas, but because of financial realities. People don't have as much money to spend. But then, anyone, even the older folks, even now, You will have the terms like samaj, and you will have terms like log, and you will have terms like this is what is expected as the societal norm. So when you go down the path of what is the societal norm, if let's say somebody came to Roark for building a shop or building a mall, and Roark built something absolutely different, and this person is concerned that I may like it, I may see the utility in it, I may see the idea behind it, but if the people don't turn up, if the commercial aspect of it is not taken care of, then the entire idea is a waste for me. That is where the people who are privately individualist also become conformist on the public front, because that is where the economics of the issue lies.
Hmm. Uh, Next, I would like to pick up Peter Keating. So, when you see his journey, you see him always being the conformist, if you would say. I mean, doing what the society likes, doing starting right from his mother, like doing what his mother wanted him to do in terms of education or in terms of how he would take his profession forward, like applying for the best, let's say, construction house or the architects, working for the best architects out there. um, I mean, people, they generally tended to love Peter Keating, but then, I mean, maybe they did not on the face of it. So, what do you feel about that? I mean, was it just because he had that charm, he could get things done? Because again, if you remember, he had actually gone behind the backs of many people and ended up getting them, I mean, expelled from work. So again, was it his charm that made people like him, or was it the fear that maybe he had the contacts to like pull some strings and get their jobs affected?
I believe see, Peter was an addict. He wasn't using drugs and alcohol, but he was an addict for approval. From his childhood, love and attention and appreciation that he got from his mother was conditional. If you do what I want, then you will receive the love that you so fervently desire. Roark, his wiring was a little different. He did not seek love and approval, but Keating wanted love and approval. And he was brought up on a healthy diet of seeking validation from external parties. That is where the external locus of control idea that I was earlier talking of. He did not have a single original thought. He did not believe that. He did not. Let's say if he was offered, do you want to have beetroot or do you want to have lady singer? His opinion, what would you like? And whatever you like, he'll have that. He did not have a single original thought. He did not have any opinion on any issue. And all he wanted to do was seek approval from others. Seek approval from others. Now, when you come across such people, in the initial interaction, they seem like the perfect soulmates, the bros that, oh, our choices match so much. But then later on, when you see them interacting in public spheres and you see them talking to other people and interacting with them in the precise same manner, and then you realize it is an act. It is not really their individual nature that is coming through. It is an entire show that is put on for the benefit of the rest of the people. That is when you start maintaining distance from them. I'm sure in your life, in your professional life so far, in your academic life so far, and also in mine, we've come across some certain individuals who thought the path to success was this way. Now, as I mentioned earlier, with passage of time, I realized you don't need to be Peter Keating in every aspect of your life, but Peter Keatings do very well in the corporate world the way we know it. The ones who are able to strike up a conversation, the ones who are able to get your approval without explicitly stating they're getting your approval and maintaining a little bit of a barrier. When you're not overexposed to the Peter Keatings of the world, you feel like they are very nice people. It is only when you talk to them for an extended period of time and you realize there is absolutely nothing but air in the upper story of the building, that is when you start generating dislike for them. And why I'm calling him an addict is hopefully in the latter part of the book, when we get to Toohey exploiting him and Peter Keating going, Peter Keating, in his worst moments, when he realizes that he is nothing, even at that time he was seeking approval from Toohey, when he knew that Toohey had pretty much exploited him in the first place. Because that is the only way he knew how to live. So he's not he's not a villain per se. He is a victim to a certain extent, but let's say there are lots of criminals that have justified reasons for doing the crimes that they've committed. Peter Keating, and justified not because some wrong was committed upon them, but that is the only world they have been exposed to. Keating, I believe, was a victim. He was he did not live in a poor neighborhood. He did not have want of resources, as in the standard want of resources. But then he was very, very deprived of love and affection without doing anything in return. And for him to seek validation, for him, the existence was entirely based on validation. The validation he sought from other people was manufactured, had to be something that he had to appeal to. He, in his exercise of seeking validation from others, he also internalized the idea that he was worth nothing unless he molded himself into the way that other people found valuable. And that is where the entire character of Peter Keating, I feel, when Roark at a later point finds pity for him, it is more like Keating from the first instance that he's mentioned in the book. He's pity worthy. Because in a room full of 300 people that know Keating and like Keating, he's utterly alone because nobody knows who he is. That sort of existence is something that I wouldn't wish upon my worst enemy.
Yes, so even like later on when he does his best work or the best projects that he builds up, there is this feeling of I mean emptiness in him. Even if there is again when you said that there was a let's say there is a room full of 300 people, still I believe he always he's in the search for something, some approval, and of course many a times it has been mentioned that he kept comparing himself with Roark, that I mean he was not as good, although he was good, he was definitely not as good as Roark, even though Roark was not, let's say, publicly appreciated or recognized for whatever his virtues or his work was. But again, he felt that sort of complex, I would say, when it came to Roark, comparing himself and feeling that only if he could get the appreciation or recognition from Roark, it would mean a lot for him. Moving on, there was this one conversation between Henry Cameron and Roark, where Cameron, in a way, tries to dissuade him, or he tries to convince him that, okay, don't get into this, don't let this, the way you're working, don't let it get too far, because I have been there, done that, and now you can see what my situation is. So there he mentions that you love your work, Roark. So what are your thoughts about that?
Uh, in many ways, I find it a reverberation of the idea from Gita, Karm karo, phal ki chinta mat karo. What Roark believes is a man's purpose or a human's purpose in this world, although it gets classified as man at a late in most of Ayn Rand's work, writings. A human's purpose in this world is to be the best they can be at whatever they believe they can be best at. So, Roark, because he believed that architecture was the thing that he found the most fascinating and he believed he could be great at that, everything else that emanates from him perfecting his skill of architecture or building was something that was supposed to be a byproduct of him becoming best at his work. And therefore, Roark did not really care if he had the stamp of approval from his college where he was expelled. He did not really care if he had the stamp of approval from his professors who did not like his assignments. He did not really want to go for a fancy internship in some fancy company. He wanted to go to the person that he believed that would help him and help him become better as an architect. He did not really mind doing the additional work, or let's say in the latter part of the book when he has a court scene. He believed the first court scene where he simply hands over the photos of his work, expecting everyone there to understand this is my original work. This was my vision. Any deviation from this vision would be a betrayal of the architectural creativity and innovation that I have brought. I am unwilling to accept it. If you don't want to do it, that is fine. But then, for me, the bigger crime is a deviation from the vision that I had. That is what his belief was. So, his sense of self-worth, let's say for some people, the sense of self-worth emanates from familial responsibility management. If I can take care of my parents, if I can provide for my family, I am being successful in life. For some people, achievement comes from, let's say, in my career, the level of the designation that I reach in my office. Roark did not get bound by these definitions. For him, sense of accomplishment and sense of self-achievement emanated from how good am I at my work. And because when you are that obsessed and that dedicated to becoming good at something, of course, that takes on the form of love that that is hard to replicate. Eventually, see, everyone is not lucky enough to find the nature of work that they love and pays them handsomely. The Roark, in that regard, was also very lucky.
Deviating a bit from the book. So, do you think this is, I mean, this is possible in real life? The way he loved his work or the way he stood for it, not accepting any changes in his work. I mean, if someone suggested even a minor change, he would just drop the commission. Do you think it is feasible in the real world, if I were to say?
Uh, you have to
Purely
take
based on your experiences. Yeah.
taking an entire step back from the book. I'd say, see, is it possible? Yes. Is it sustainable? Unlikely. Is it something that we expect the world to move towards? Impossible. And where I'm coming to this idea is, see, Roark was a unique character. He had absolutely no responsibilities. There was no family that he was looking to support. There was no home loans on his head. There were no EMIs that he had to pay. There were no sisters or brothers whose marriage he had to take care of. There was very little expenses that he was responsible for. And even if, let's say, Roark, in a very, very darkened way, if Roark died 50 pages into the book, nobody was going to remember it. And that was okay with Roark. That is not how most of the people are brought up. We want to leave a legacy behind. We want to get to a point where we are successful. Success, in the most simplest terms, in the way the society has evolved, is measured in money terms. And we have responsibilities. So Roark, in that regard, was a very unique character that he had no responsibilities. He had no aspirations for amassing a lot of money. All he wanted to do was be good at his work because that is where his sense of self-worth lay. In the real world, coming back to your question, in the real world, if you find somebody who is dedicated in that fashion, is it possible? Yes, but the way the world is structured right now, with the speed with which we move on from one idea to the other, it is highly unlikely that somebody can stay, let's say, become huge by staying true to the vision. In fact, one of the most, let's say, the foremost visionary of our times, the Elon Musk of the worlds, it is so conveniently forgotten that Elon Musk bought into Tesla and was not the originator. He was not a founder member of Tesla. He did not have anything to do with the battery technology. He did not have anything to do with the electric vehicle market. It was everything that was developed by other people. He bought in at a later point, and then he gets credit for, you know, starting Tesla and founding Tesla and doing all that, because Elon Musk, in many ways, for me, is the Peter Keatings of the world. But the Roarks of the world don't get as much credit, uh, don't get the recognition or the success that they deserve. But they are very critical. In fact, the Roarks of the world are the reason why Keatings of the world even thrive in the first place, or the Tooheys of the world thrive in the first place. it is possible to live like Roark. In fact, if Roarks were not possible, the Tooheys and Keatings would have nothing to fall back upon.
Yes, definitely. There is this discussion or this, the kind of defense that Roark gives in the last scene, but we'll pick this up later, maybe. So after the very first house that, or the very first assignment that Roark completed, if you remember, Toohey especially, he never wrote anything about it in his column. Why do you think was this his action? I mean, why did he not at least give, let's say, even there could be some sort of, I mean, negative comments about it, but he simply chose not to comment on it.
Okay. There's something I learned during my MBA course. If you acknowledge somebody, even if negatively, you are turning eyeballs to them. And to the realizing what Roark was doing and what Roark represented, the individualist idea, non-conformism. To he was significantly older than Roark. He had lived his life long enough to realize what he believed was the right way of existence and what he believed should be happening. In many ways, Toohey was very, very individualist. But he was an individualist to the extent that it enables him to manipulate other people. While Toohey is a journalist officially, but Toohey's true calling was in manipulating other people, getting them to do the work that he wanted them to do. For him to either recognize or even denigrate Roark would lead to him acknowledging that Roark exists. Now, him, despite being the leader of the intelligentsia and having significant influence among the intelligent and powerful people of the world, if he went ahead and talked of Roark, other people would turn to Roark and somebody might choose to place their bets with Roark. Versus him not acknowledging Roark at all. Roark remains in obscurity. Roark does not get he's not getting favorable coverage anywhere. He's getting a lot of negative coverage everywhere. Here he's getting the disdain of not even being acknowledged. For Toohey, that was the goal. And later on, Toohey, in his wonderful idea, he stated, if you want to ruin somebody, don't claim they are a bad architect. Attack them from a different angle, which he chose to do by saying that he's not a religious person. He's essentially engaging in blasphemy. And then deep down, when he had his own individual conversation with Roark, he realized, he talks to them, you are an extremely religious person. You are a very spiritual and devoted person. He knows that Roark is spiritual. His spirituality is nothing to do with gods. His spirituality is everything to do with becoming a higher being by becoming the best at the work that you do.
Okay. So now, Stephen Mallory, do you think that in some ways his work or the way he worked, his ethics were somewhat similar to Roark's ethics or the way Roark conducted his work?
Their approach towards work was similar. Their reaction to the reception of the work by the other people wasn't very similar. Roark, once he was done with his piece and he felt that, okay, this is the design that I'm going with and this is what should happen. He felt that this is the end point. Beyond this, whatever happens, whether, as in, I would want it to be constructed this way, but if people like it or don't like it, I don't care. Mallory, on the other hand, very much like Cameron, this was the flaw that both the dear people that Roark knew, the two people that he genuinely fondly cared for. Cameron, he was too old. He was like the father that Roark never had. He wanted to bring him to the good side or to the light, but it was too late. He was too embittered with his experiences. For Mallory, he was the elder brother that he could see that Mallory and Cameron, both of them, got impacted by the negative reception that they were getting. And Roark was fortunate on that front that his emotional makeup, his emotional wiring was such that he did not care for feedback. So, in terms of his approach to work, Mallory was very similar to Roark. But in terms of reception to reaction from the people who were reviewing their work, Mallory did feel a lot of despondence because of the rejection and criticism that was coming his way, which was also unfair because the work that he did was so excellent that criticism was not warranted. Yet criticism went his way because of vested interests and agendas that were out there.
Okay. There is this one line that I liked from the book, which is a desire to chase the hardest is maybe a confession of weakness in itself. I mean, this might be like someone citing perfectionism as one of their weaknesses. What are your views about it?
Um, I don't think a desire to chase the hardest is a confession of weakness in itself, but I'd rather change it to, or if you're completely sure of the idea that you're never ever going to achieve perfection, yet you continue to chase it, that is the best flow state to be. And if I may draw upon some other words, in the world of football, there used to be a player by the name of Andreas Iniesta from Spain. And my brother and I used to watch him early 2008 Euro World Cup win for Spain, 2010 World Cup win for Spain. At that time, Barcelona was also on the rise. He was a pivotal player in both these teams and all these teams. So whenever we used to watch him play, whenever he got the ball, he had three options. One was the safest pass, second was still a safe pass, and the third one was the most difficult pass that no normal player would ever try. Invariably, he went for the third pass. And invariably, he was successful. Not 100% successful, let's say 90% successful. 10% of the time, he was not getting it right. And there were certain people at that time who were critical of him for going for the risky pass. But then, because of my influence on the book and other things, I genuinely felt that, let's say, if the game was in balance, and at that time he was taking the risky pass, I can understand you being critical of him. But when the game is, you're in lead, or this is the beginning of the match, there is no pressure on you, at that time, not going for the absolutely difficult pass that will enable your team to generate some sort of advantage, that should be criminal. So the idea that we are going for is going for the hardest thing, knowing that you are never ever going to achieve it. Still, you try to move in that direction is a virtue. But I have another, let's say, there is a basketball player by the name of Shaquille O'Neal, and there is another basketball player by the name of Giannis. So, one year, when Giannis's team did not win the NBA championship, a reporter said, "Do you believe that this season is a failure? The season is a failure." And Giannis said, "How can you even ask that question? Because you don't get promotions in your job every year. Do you think that year was a failure? You don't get insane hikes. You don't get vacations. You don't get prizes. We are building towards something. These are steps in the process of success. You can't call this a failure." Shaquille O'Neal, he's an old NBA legend, has won multiple championships, was one of the best players in his time. His take on this was, no, if you don't win the championship, this is a failure. I felt Shaquille O'Neal's opinion, or let's say, if it is not perfection, it is a failure, is a bad attitude to have. Because then what is going to happen is you're going to be perpetually in failure. You're never ever going to achieve. You're, the end result is, the line that I would prefer is, you try your best. Whether that ends up becoming the perfect outcome or not, you cannot really control that. But if you've tried your best, you walk away from it feeling, okay, there was nothing more that I could give. I have done everything in my part. If that leads to success, great. If that does not lead to success right now, it will still pay off at some time in future. But you claiming, no, no, I will not invest in it, or I will not do some activity unless perfection can be achieved. That I believe is a weird idea. Additionally, a desire to chase the hardest path, chase, not necessarily achieve, a desire to chase the hardest path is a virtue. But a desire to, as in, classifying everything apart from perfection as failure is also not acceptable.
Okay. Next up, I have that again in this one of these get-togethers that they were a part of. Peter Keating, he suggested Roark that maybe you should try and be what people want you to be, and in that way, you will get them where you need them to be. Again, what are your views about that?
I think this is a rehashing of the earlier conversation that we had. Peter Keating's need for approval, Howard Roark's absolute no-nonsense attitude towards, I want to be the best at my work. I don't care if other people like it or dislike it. If I believe this is right, this is right. Keating, in this rare moment, is actually showing compassion for somebody, which is a very original thought for Keating. So kudos to him on that front. But because we also know Howard Roark's character, we also know this Keating's exercise is a futile one. Roark is not going to change his paths. Roark, for somebody to have accepted expulsion from the architecture school, if you give them advice, no, now you should start being appeasing people so that there is success in your career, it is definitely not going to work. Again, at the individual level, in an ideal world, let's say a utopia, in a world where I believe stuff, the way the world should run, the Roark's model is fine. But in the real world, Keating's model is the one that succeeds in most cases. And the Keating's model succeeds because you be what you want, you should be according to the audience that you have, according to the people that you're interacting with. But at a later point of time, the same audience will demand originality from you. And at that time, you will have to go back to the Roark in your team to get the original idea.
Yes, that is what I think Peter did every time that he had a difficult commission. I mean, whenever he needed an out-of-the-box idea, he definitely went to Roark. But again, Roark never expected any recognition again from the work that he did for Keating. Because, yes, that is something I'd asked you earlier, if you remember. Like, why would he always help Keating, knowing that this is that he was his competitor, or maybe that he was getting his work done without giving him any due recognition for that. But that is what I realized later, that for Keating or for Roark, I mean, it was more like that the work was being done or that the building was being built, and it did not matter to him who was actually getting the praise for it. So that was there. Moving on, why do you think Toohey actually joined the banner?
Uh,
Given his all of the idealistic talk that he did, even though he was manipulative, let's say, but then again, why choose the banner where they were they were printing stories left, right, center, not caring whether it was the uh, right story to put or not, and they were at times they were also implanting stories just to sell stories. I mean, just to have sensational pieces out there. So, what could have been the motive for Toohey to actually join the banner?
in simple words, Toohey felt that Vinand was manipulatable. He felt that Vinand could be influenced enough to get what Toohey wanted. And the fact that he was able to print a first page reproach of Howard Roark in the banner at a later point of time, it proved to his aspirations or at least estimations accurate that Vinand could be influenced into doing something that he felt was appropriate. I believe before getting into Toohey joining the banner, we need to look at what Vinand did at the beginning of his tenure as the head of banner. The
Hmm.
experiment that he carried out
Yes.
on the front page, there were two news stories. The first
Hmm.
story being cancer research. We are like some small amount away from finding the cure. On the second part of the page, child, a desolate child, and I think a mother or just the child,
Mother, mother,
a,
I guess, yes.
a mother and a child, and this was the rational person's choice of donation. This was the emotional person's choice of donation, and then the dollar amounts that were sent in. I don't remember the precise dollar amount. I just remember the first cause had very little amounts. The second cause had tremendous donations being sent in. And then he said, this is the direction the banner takes. We know what moves the needle. Emotion moves the needle. So that is what we have to do. And in many ways, I believe Gail Wynand, this book was written in 1940s. This book
Yes.
was written in 1940s. This was very, very prescient of how the media landscape would turn out at a later point of time. Media was always supposed to be the fourth pillar of democracy. Beside the legislative, executive, and judiciary, media was supposed to hold the government and the other branches of government to account and be confrontational, be attritional. But now, because media houses have forgone that purpose and they have turned more into businesses that care more about TRPs and the bottom line, they have turned into perfect propaganda fronts for certain agendas. And then they keep flipping between whatever parties and whatever institutions that they feel are benefiting the most. Additionally, let's say the biggest challenge is, see, I have a completely entire 1 hour rant for media, but this media choosing to not report the truth and choosing to implant stories and going for emotional reaction rather than transferring of news, this was something that was not happening in 1943 or 44, whenever this book was published. This was not something that was happening in 1940s. The fact that Ayn Rand also included this idea in the book was something that was very impressive to me.
Yes, I did read that her book was, although it was based in 1900s, early 1900s, but again it is relatable even today.
And yeah, that's it for this episode. When we were recording the episode, we did realize that maybe a single episode would not do justice to the book that is The Fountainhead. So there will be a second part coming soon. Do stay tuned and happy reading.